Hello, my beautiful IU. Thank you for joining us today. I think we have a really appropriate and engaging topic. There's a lot of the work that I do, and I know that my guest does, is around guiding our clients into the deep shadow work that maybe they haven't touched their whole life. And I've had that experience several times. We'll get into that with a client who, for whatever reason, is at the point in their life where they're ready to look at their shadows. And we're going to get into what all that is. But first, I want to introduce my special guest, Mignon Herzlevesque.
Hello, I'm Mignon. This is my first time on here, so bear with me.
Well, you're welcome, and we'll get into Mignon's background. But first, I just want to welcome everybody and set our intention for this session that we're going to really embrace and examine our shadows in a safe space. And why are we doing that? That's the big question. Why do we need to do that? So as you know from my past live streams, what I'm all about is total transformation, mind, body, spirit. And we tend to compartmentalize our problems as humans, where we think, I have a health problem or have a relationship problem or whatever, and we think about it like this. Because that's what we're programmed to do, frankly, from the time we can walk, is to think about doing and overcoming a problem. And we don't ever think, or at least we're not trained to think holistically. And so what I found in my work for myself, my own healing journey, is if you do that, your progress is limited. You're limiting yourself. And so if you have, for example, a health issue or a relationship issue, and yet you're not willing to give up the shadows that influence you, the dark emotions, the unresolved trauma, all these types of things, you're limiting your progress. So that's the why. That's why we get into this. And it's often not fun, and it's often very difficult, and it often changes the relationships around you, some better, some worse. But change is what we're after, right? We're not here to just cruise through life or just keep, that probably describes a small number of people. Most of us keep encountering the same trauma over and over again until we resolve it. That's kind of the pattern that's laid down for us. So with that setting of intention, I want to turn the mic over to Mignon, and if you can just introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about your background, your story, kind of how you came to the work.
Yeah,
People have been watching my live streams know my story, so I'd rather hear yours.
sure.
but I'll drop in a few tidbits here and there. So Mignon, please.
Okay. Hello, I'm Mignon again. Um, I started my journey roughly 10 years ago. My background is I was very involved with the Catholic Church, very judgmental. I was a Bible thumping bigot. If you did not believe in Jesus, we were not friends. I did not say but, I would say hiney. This was my program though. I was programmed to be what my family thought was the best mom, which was like June Cleaver, Martha Stewart. And I just never fit. I just never fit into that. And my ex-husband now, he struggled with addiction pretty hard. I found him purple, blue, and gray off of a heroin overdose. And at the time, I was so naive when I found it. It looked like sand, and he told me that it was holy sand. And my kids went to a Catholic school, so I was like, okay, sure, all right. So I gave it back. He survived, and that just really traumatized me. And I just started. We went through a divorce, and I just needed to figure out who I was. I didn't know who I was. I was just someone everybody else wanted me to be. And I changed my name, my entire name, and started over. I started doing spiritual work. I started thinking I was hearing things, seeing things. I'm like, I must be crazy. So I had 3 mental health evaluations. I'm not crazy. I just am very intuitive. I'm clairvoyant, clairaudience. And then I started getting into the spiritual community where everything was love and light and beautiful. and it just wasn't working for me. I was like, I'm not love and light. I'm not. And so I took a big leap and decided, I'm shadow. I'm all shadow work. I'm the dark parts, the hard parts. Those are the people I can help. The people who are trying to manifest and they can't. The people who aren't in union with their feminine and the masculine to reach this herogasmos and, this space that nobody wants to go in. I'm that space. I love the dark space.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I know sometimes it's hard to be vulnerable in
Yeah.
public, but I
Yes.
really honor you for sharing that story. And I've had similar experience with the shadow work and wanting to be of the light and embrace the light. And through my shamanic training, what I've realized through the way that the Pacos and the Andes model this behavior is there can be no light without shadow and no shadow without light. And
Yes.
so the goal is integration.
Yes.
The goal is practicing neutrality and non-reaction. So
Yes.
when we do that, we find that whatever comes up in our life, whatever chaos, we perceive is thrown at us, we can be in a place of calm, like literally the calm in the eye of the storm.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what happens around us. We can actually choose to respond instead of just reacting. And I
Yes.
think one of the biggest, not to wax too philosophical, but I think one of the biggest issues we have in our society now is that people are just running around reacting.
Yeah.
There's no mindfulness to it. There's no response
Yeah.
chosen. It's just
Yeah.
they're reacting from their wounds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you can pull yourself out and be the observer, you can change anything. You can really see things for what they are and not your own trauma or what somebody else wants you to be like or yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that to pull a thread from your story, one of the things that you shared that I find pretty common is some degree of religious trauma, where even if you're not in trauma, your mind was programmed at a young
Yeah.
age to think about things like you're born in sin, you're less than, the way
Yes.
forward is to give up your power to
Yes.
something else, right? All of
Right.
these things can be very subtle and very endemic into the thought process. And frankly, I believe a lot of that keeps us away from wanting
Yeah.
to dive in and do the shadow work and really embrace the chaos for a while
Yeah.
at least. We have to embrace the chaos because it's chaotic.
Yes. Yes, but in the chaos is where you just come alive. Like, can you imagine everything that you suppress saying yes to? Yes, yes, giving yourself that, even in marriages, I feel like the husband and wife dynamics, they're not quite right. Women want to be, um, they want to be just, what is the word? They want to do everything right. They want to be this calm, they don't want to own their sexuality and there's all this dynamics because men are sexual beings, and they want this and it's a give and take. But when you are when you are when you're healed in that area or you're healing, you can come alive for your partner and yourself in ways that you never knew you could. And not and denying that part of yourself is so damaging. It's so
Yeah,
damaging. Yeah.
I'm with you there. I think
Yeah.
and not just think, but what I've seen is, to tie it back to the religious programming, sometimes that's what's contributing to it because I've done prior live streams on you're the author, not the story, right? But those stories can be really powerful and they can kind of worm their way into our sense of identity.
Yeah.
So you think in order to be a good person, I have to be this way. And to me, that's the most mind
Yeah.
blowing, taking you off the path thing that you can think is that you
Yeah.
are limited to a story
Hmm.
when you are so much greater than that. And if the
Absolutely.
story is about a relationship dynamic or sex or whatever, being a breadwinner or whatever it is, we get locked into these roles. And the men that I work with, especially, as I'm focusing more and more on men's work, is these men come to me and they've done everything right.
Yeah.
That's the story, right? They held down a job for 30 years. They made, some money. They have things, but their relationships maybe are not great. Even if they're okay, they're not feeling fulfilled. And a lot of times they're not okay, or they have health problems. And all of these things are, there's a term I love in positive psychology called leaking sideways anger, where if you don't deal with the anger, you leak it out and it kind of corrupts your relationships. Well, it's not just anger. You can kind of leak sideways who you really, the anxiousness and the chaos of who your unfulfilled self, right? There's a version of you that's who you were always meant to be. And it's not a story. It's fully authentic. And so when we're not that, I believe, and my opinion may change as I do more work with people, but I feel like that manifests itself in all these feelings of dissatisfaction and anxiety, because part of yourself knows that you're not living authentically.
Yes.
And so it's kind of not sabotaging, but trying to steer you onto the right path. And a lot of times that's very traumatic, right? Because you keep experiencing these horrible traumas until you get it, and you can start to embrace it. But I'm just wondering along those lines what you've experienced with your clients.
Yes, I've experienced the body keeps score, right? You know that. So if you keep the more you push in, it's going to manifest into, you know, gallstones, gallbladder issues, all these other issues. And so really looking at those and just taking the small steps, even if it's something small, and just sitting in with what you feel is authentic for you. Maybe it's, you know, for me it's silly, but wearing makeup, looking attractive.
Mhm.
Once in my clients, they feel that they're a mom when they can't wear makeup, they can't look attractive. Once they get into being who they are, this woman, that's alive, and
Yeah.
a whole new life you can just see the transformation in their body, their face, their skin, their health, everything. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, isn't that amazing too? It's like once you start to embrace that authenticity and you start to do the work, people around you notice.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
energy is sexy,
Yes, it
right?
is.
So it's more like your outer self is starting to match your inner self, right?
Hmm.
And you have a desire, even if it's unconscious, to express your outer self differently.
Hmm.
It's with it's with kind of like a quiet confidence that you
Yeah.
carry yourself. And for some people, it may be the first time in their life that they've allowed themselves to feel that way when they start doing
Yeah.
this work. So
Yeah.
it's to say that this is necessary work is underselling it. It's profoundly necessary. And in
Yeah.
fact, it's foundational because a lot of the other things that you're trying to, achieve or be in your life are going to be sabotaged unless you do it.
Right. Um, Something that just came up is, before I started doing this work, I never saw my children. I see them now as fragmented parts of myself. And, doing this work not only is for us, but we're changing our children's story for them. We're giving them the ability to choose their own story and choose their own identity, And I see that I have 5 children, and every single one of them, it's like I'm a whole and I just shattered, and each one of them are fragmented parts of myself. And it's so interesting and fascinating, but I'm so glad that I've done this, because giving my children, the ability to live a life that is free and authentic to who they are is, I feel like, a huge gift. As parents doing this work, it's not just for us. It's not selfish by doing this work. Our children, they're freed from all of the generational crap. We are changing history for our children to live freely.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And it ties so nicely into Andean cosmology, where they talk a lot about ancestor work. And when you're doing your work, you're doing their work. and
Mm-hmm.
vice versa. And so it's perfectly fine and acceptable to call on them to help you do your
Yes.
work, because
Yeah.
you're not only surfacing and breaking ancestral curses, the really bad stuff, but
Yes.
you're breaking the cycles that may have come before. And I experienced this firsthand. I had a shamanic, or excuse me, an out of body kind of a samadhi type experience with ancestor work specifically, and I'd never done it before.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my grandfather appear to me and basically let me know that we have the same issue. It didn't matter what the issue was, but he was showing up to help me work on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the time that I walked away from my chronic pain about a little over a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And because it was time, it was like all the things I'd been doing, of course, led up to that moment. But at the time, it seemed like this is miraculous,
Mm-hmm.
and how could this be? But it was because I believe of that ancestral connection. And so, if we can be that ancestor, to
Mm-hmm.
your point, wow, how powerful is that? And you've got all these little
Absolutely.
humans that are your kids that you're modeling that for, even having your emotions, modeling it to a kid,
Mm-hmm.
especially. I hate to keep beating this drum, but it keeps coming up for me as men modeling our emotions, right? And letting your children know that I can be sad, I can be angry, and not catastrophize it. It's
Right.
like that's just what I'm feeling right now. It
Right.
doesn't mean life is going to change. It doesn't mean you're not safe, right? But we can have our emotions and model that for them,
Yeah.
and let them know that that's part of being authentic.
Yes. Yes. Yes, it's okay, and it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be mad.
Yeah.
Those are fine, you know? So just let it being I hear it a lot. Boys don't cry. Suck it up. No,
Right.
let them feel their emotion. At some point you're not going to be able to be there for them. They're going to need to do this alone. And showing them how to handle those big emotions. I mean, it could save lives. It really could. I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I've said it before. It's like ripples in a pond when you do your work,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
with people that love you or look at you as some kind of an example,
Hmm.
and you're doing the work. It changes them
Hmm.
because they see, oh,
Hmm.
maybe I can have my emotions. Maybe I can live as my authentic self, or at
Yeah.
least I can try. I mean, that's the thing. We don't have to do it perfectly. Whatever. What does that even mean, right? The
Hmm.
fact that we're trying to do it
Hmm.
is the point.
Right. And going with your ancestral story, there's something I went through and found that was really profound was, a long time ago, women weren't allowed to have money. They weren't allowed to have land. And if you weren't married, you literally were going to die. So I see these emotions come up in women now where they feel the need to have a husband, have um they need to look a certain way. I mean, if you think about it, back then, I mean, that was a real trouble. That was a real struggle, at least. Like, and women I feel like they're catty a lot. They want to try to be better than another one. And back then, that, if, a woman looked at your husband, women would fear that that woman would take their husband and then they would die, literally, with no money, no
Right?
land. They was going to die. And of course, then they would start, you're a witch and burning people and all of these things, even though we weren't there, that's
Yeah.
in our DNA. That's still in our
Yeah.
DNA. So we really want to look at that when you come up with emotions and you're like, I don't know where this is coming from.
Yeah.
Let's think about your lineage. Where are your ancestors from? What did they go
Well,
through?
yeah, that's a great point, and I know. Well, probably more people that are watching this believe in reincarnation. Some people don't. It's really not required to believe
Yeah.
in it to do your shadow work. You
Right.
can even look at your own life this time around to
Yeah.
do your shadow work, right?
Right.
But I'm with you. I believe that those in the Andeans believe that whatever you do in this life echoes for 7 generations. That's just their way of thinking about it, right? And if you look at the metaphysics of that, we've all been men and we've all been women many times. And so men carry those wounds as well.
Mm-hmm.
And women carry the men's wounds from those times where we felt such pressure to compete and
Mm-hmm.
such pressure to achieve
Hmm.
and no emphasis on being present, having your emotions, being loving, being nurturing as a
Yeah.
man. It
Yeah.
was all about I have to survive. I have to go do, right? And then you express very beautifully the women's side of it. So we all have that
Hmm.
trauma
Hmm.
that we carry forward with us. Not even to mention some of the horrible things people have experienced in this life
Yeah.
that they're trying to overcome with, the family
Mhm.
dynamics, abuse, addiction,
Yes.
all the
Yes.
things, right? So we
Yes.
don't we don't even have to go looking to prior generations, even though I believe that stuff's there too.
Yeah.
But it's the I guess my point is it's the same work. It's
Yeah.
the same shadow work, right? Where whatever it's manifesting, doing this work is that profound.
Right. Right. Also, if you're married to a person, or even coworkers or friends, whatever someone is doing to you that you don't like, typically is something you need to look at for yourself. Like if you're being triggered by something in someone, that's a good way to know that you probably should do some shadow work in that area.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, triggers are a great signpost.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be great if more? I avoid most of the political ads and stuff on Facebook because I don't want them to give me more of them. But if you think about the way that people allow themselves to be triggered, it can be such a barrier to really thinking about the source of the trigger and the pain behind it. Because we know that pain is really the trigger for fear, which is the trigger for hate. And
Yeah.
so who wants to live that way? I guess some
Right.
people, do, but there's such a better way. You may even arrive at the same place, but from a decision and a lifestyle perspective, but wouldn't it be better to arrive at that place having really examined how you got there,
Yeah.
right? But most people just don't. They just react, and like I was saying before, they just react and say, "Oh, I'm this or I'm that," and okay, but
Yeah.
what about the other people? And
Yeah.
I love the notion of the Greek dialectic. That's like an ideal that's been completely lost in our society. And the Greeks valued reasoned argument.
Mm.
You'd have two, okay, granted they were men only, right? But I think the dynamic applies to our current time where they would sit down and argue a point from two different perspectives. And it was considered honorable to be able to convince the other person of your point of view. And they did it through questioning. They
Yeah.
didn't do it by shouting at each other.
Mm.
They, the ideal that they tried to embody was to come up with really, really good questions for the other person.
Hmm.
And if at the end of that
Right.
dialectic, they both had the same opinion, they were honored by their peers. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
that was amazing that you did
Hmm.
that. Sometimes
Hmm.
they didn't convince each other and they would walk away, they'd shake hands, and say, okay, but I feel better about my position now that we had this dialogue, right? I mean, mind blowing, right? I mean, what if we did that now? What if we had a political debate like that?
Right. Right.
But no, we're sitting on our shadows and we're throwing our wounds back and forth. And
Right.
I see it so clearly now. And when I watched the presidential debate, I saw it so clearly. It was not only the people speaking, but the collective wounds of who they represented. That's what was being discussed. It wasn't anything real or substantive. It was
Hmm.
just wounds. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that we can do as guides in this shadow work, I think, is to be a mirror for people and just hold it up and say, look, and let them see what the real dynamic behind their actions and their behaviors being driven by the shadow.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the work itself. I'm interested in the modality that you practice, and I
Mhm.
know we all, in my terminology, we all bring our own medicine to the work that we do. It's not
Yeah.
just one thing, but I'd love you to talk a little bit about how you approach the work and the kinds of modalities that you use, so people get a sense a little bit of what it might be like to work with you.
I use hypnotherapy. A lot of times people come to me and they know there's something wrong with their life. It's not the way they want it to be. They think they know what it is, but a lot of times they don't know what it is actually. Because what I'm finding is when we go back to a hypnotherapy session, it's not even what they thought it was going to be either. And so I use hypnotherapy to get to the subconscious mind. That's the part that controls 95% of who you are as a human. And so that I feel like it's a good place to start. Let's go to the source and find out what's really bothering you. How did you really get here? And so I use hypnotherapy with shadow work. Yeah.
That's great. And the type of hypnotherapy that you did is the Dolores Cannon School, right?
Yes.
QHHT.
QHHT and RTT, Marissa Peer.
That's amazing. I know just enough about the QHHT to be dangerous, but it's something that really interests me
Mhm.
because what intrigued me, and I've read all of Dolores Cannon's books. I'm a huge fan, especially of the 5-part convoluted universe books, where she's able to string together um, sessions from people that are widely separated in time, decades, and people that have had no contact with each other, and yet they were all bringing her pieces of this narrative story about how the universe works.
Mhm.
And the thing I love about that is that it's all through individual stories,
Yeah.
just people,
Mhm.
you know, just, average people. There is such a
Mhm.
thing.
You're right.
And the profound takeaway that I got from that is each one of us doing this work has a profound impact on everyone else on the planet.
Yeah.
It's like we become the way showers
Yes.
for others, right? So yeah, it's amazing. So with the shadow work, so do you do sessions? Do you run programs? How does that work for you?
Yep. I do individual sessions. Typically, if it's a behavioral problem like confidence or something like that, typically only one session is needed. If it's a really big addiction, let's say heroin, typically 3 sessions are needed. I also have workbooks, and I also do weekly check-ins where I see how you're going, what you need, how else I can, help you. It's like having your like a one-on-one coach, and deep diving into your subconscious, getting right to the source. Yeah.
That's amazing. So without using any names, of course,
Mhm.
can you give us a couple of examples of maybe some work you've done with people that resulted in a profound change in their life?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about my ex-husband, for instance. He had went to the Betty Ford Center. That's over $200,000 in rehab. Okay. Nothing worked. Nothing worked. And he tried hypnotherapy, and he's been clean from heroin for 6 years now. It's the only thing that's worked. I mean, he's been through every therapy, every talk therapy, EMDR. Like I said, the Betty Ford Center, which is the best of the best in California, nothing worked. And hypnotherapy actually is what I feel like, and he feels like saved his life. So yeah,
That's amazing that it's that intervention, that modality can have such a lasting impact on a person.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
I don't know how you feel about it, but how I look at it is it's really mostly about them being ready to let
Yeah,
go of whatever it is. They just needed a little guidance about how to let
right,
it go. Right.
right. Right. And you don't necessarily need to have like an issue or a problem. Maybe you just want some insight on who you are, where you come from. You have questions. And for me, it was really interesting. I was telling you I changed my name. When I did my hypnotherapy session from one of my or one of the guys in my school at the time, I went back to a time where um, I was meeting up with the bishop, and I had to teach him the ways, and I was so frustrated. I did not want to help him, but here I am having to help him. I'm waiting for the boat to come. And long story short, I learned that my last name, Herzlevesque, means heart the bishop. And my now husband, his last name is Levesque. So I'm right where I'm supposed to be. And it's just amazing how how would I have known that at the time? You know, it's just really cool what can come up for you to just get that validation that you are where you're supposed to be. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that in Dolores Cannon's books, she wrote a lot about, at least the early books, it was all about past, what she called past life regression, right?
Yes.
And it evolved, but it evolved over time. And the entities on the other side, the spirit guides that were helping her, encouraged her to stop saying that and
Yeah.
start talking about the fact that we are multidimensional beings living many lives at once and that time is an illusion. So there is no past.
Right.
And
Right.
so the quantum reality of that is kind of mind blowing because it becomes energetically possible to connect to any
Yes.
of those other lives,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe we are living in a way that we are healed, at least of
Mm-hmm.
the things in this life,
Mm-hmm.
and we can call that in and connect to that energy.
Right. And I can tell you 100% that this duality, this is it's a real thing. Being able to be the person observing the hypnotherapist. I'm observing what's happening. I'm the hypnotherapist. Being able to be in two different time frames, seeing that in real time puts so much into perspective. Like this isn't just something that is a belief, a maybe this is happening. No, this really is happening. I see people's accents change, their whole demeanor change. It is incredible. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And there's a corollary in the work that I do around family and ancestor work. We call it family constellations. And
Mm,
it's a work that actually comes from an indigenous practice in Africa, of all places. And it's made
mm,
its way through positive psychology. It's part of what the work I do. And in this work, you go to, you create a sacred space like we always do, and then you go to this deep place and actually experience your ancestor. And they could be alive, they could be past. It doesn't really matter because you're working on the issue you have with them.
right,
And
right.
you're able to model your side and their side. But it's not just talking, it's actually embodying
Yes,
that other person, at least the
yes,
part of that
yes,
you ran afoul of or you had an issue with, right?
right.
And I've seen just extremely emotional releases, profound changes in people just being able to do that, and feel. I think it's really about feeling and embodying that other person and
Yeah,
knowing how wounded they are and that their wounds hurt you, right?
yeah.
So you get both sides of the dynamic that way.
Hmm.
This is
Definitely.
all amazing stuff. I wanted to mention this book, Your Soul Contract Decoded: Discover the Spiritual Map of Your Life with Numerology by Nicholas David, and I'll put the link to it below the video. But we were talking about this before we came on. This is the book I was mentioning that talks about reclaiming your name because your name is such a fundamental part of your identity, and choosing a name that's representative of who you really are and what you're really here on earth to do. But it's a lot more than that. I think it ties together the themes that we're talking about here. It's less about the numerology part. It's more about embodying the energy that you need to embody to actually change.
Hmm.
And everything, the way I look at it is once you start doing this work, everything's on the table. So you have to kind of look at, there are no sacred cows in your life. Everything has to be subject to work and to scrutiny. Your kids, your spouse, your work environment, professional work environment, and realize that on the other side of it, when you embody this new reality, you're going to be a different person, and that's good, I
Yeah.
think, no matter
Yes,
what it looks like, because it's authentic, right?
yes, very much.
So, any parting thoughts, Mignon, about people contacting you, wanting to work with you?
Yeah, I feel like if you have that calling, it has to be something you want to do, not something that, a spouse is saying you need to change, you need to be better. If you have that calling just to love yourself again or to know how to love yourself, take the step because you are worth it. You're worth it. Your happiness. You cannot say it enough. You deserve to live a life that you're proud of, that you respect yourself and you love yourself. So
Amazing.
definitely. Yeah,
Thank you, Mignon. And thank you so much for being here. And to the audience watching, whether it's live or you're watching the recording, in the description of the event, there's a link that you can book time with Mignon, and also one for me. So if you want to explore this more, please book time with us, and we'll figure out where you're at and what you need to do, and if we're the right person to help you or not. I think we're both on that same page. If we're not, we'll tell you.
definitely.
So thank you, everyone. I love you as always. I leave you with the best and highest intention for your embracing the shadow work so that you can become the person that you've always meant to be.